The air above Raltor 7 shimmered with the heat of the twin suns, casting jagged shadows over the rocky terrain. The outpost, little more than reinforced bunkers and hastily erected defensive emplacements, stood in stark contrast to the looming cliffs that enclosed it. Dust swirled as the wind howled through the canyons, carrying the scent of ionized metal and impending battle. Lieutenant Adrian Cole lay prone on a ridge overlooking the battlefield, his rifle nestled against his shoulder, its long barrel motionless as he tracked movement through the scope. His breath was steady, slow, controlled. He had spent the last 3 hours observing, watching the Kryn mass in the valley below, their chitinous bodies shifting in an eerie, synchronized rhythm. They were patient, calculating. They always were. Beside him, Sergeant Elias Vance adjusted the magnification on his binoculars. "They're waiting for something," he murmured. "They've got the numbers to rush us, but they're holding back." Cole didn't respond immediately. He followed the slight variations in the Kryn's formation, the subtle shifts of their battle line. The hive mind didn't do caution for its own sake. If they weren't attacking yet, they were waiting for the perfect moment. Down below, along the makeshift barricades, the rest of the Alliance's forces prepared. Telari commandos hovered inches above the ground, their bioluminescent bodies pulsing as they linked their minds in a combat net. Olmari infantry checked their plasma carbines, their biomechanical armor humming as it synchronized with their neural inputs. Even the towering Vraks, with their four-armed, multi-barreled weapons, stood at attention, waiting for the call to fire. The only ones who weren't standing still were the humans. Cole watched his fellow soldiers, scattered along the defenses, adjusting sandbags, shifting their positions, double-checking their weapons. It wasn't disorderly, it was instinct. The others might call it inefficiency, but Cole knew better. War wasn't precise. It was ugly, chaotic. The Kryn understood that better than most. And if the other species weren't ready to adapt, they would be slaughtered. A low, guttural chittering echoed through the valley. Then the Kryn moved. It was like watching a dam break. Thousands of bodies surged forward in an undulating tide, their black exoskeletons reflecting the harsh sunlight as they swarmed toward the outpost. Their clawed limbs dug into the rocky terrain, propelling them forward with terrifying speed. Plasma fire erupted from the defenses, streaking through the air in glowing arcs. Telari precision strikes severed limbs mid-charge. Olmari gunners unleashed carefully calculated bursts, each shot landing with mechanical accuracy. The Vraks, towering over the barricades, swept their heavy cannons in wide arcs, mowing down entire clusters of attackers. And yet the Kryn barely faltered. Cole watched as they adjusted, twisting their bodies mid-sprint to avoid incoming fire. The ones that fell were immediately replaced, their ranks shifting in real time to compensate for losses. This wasn't mindless aggression. It was adaptation at an inhuman speed. He exhaled slowly, finger tightening on the trigger. His crosshairs hovered over a Kryn officer, its armored crest marked with the intricate patterns of command. He adjusted for distance, wind speed, gravitational pull. A shot from this range would need to be perfect. Then just before he fired, the Kryn shifted again. They weren't just charging. They were hurting. Cole's eyes narrowed. The Alliance forces were concentrating their fire on the densest parts of the swarm, but the Kryn weren't breaking apart like they should have. Instead, they were subtly guiding the defenders' focus, creating the illusion of vulnerability while directing fire away from. The ground exploded. A shockwave rippled through the outpost as an underground detonation sent soldiers flying. The Kryn had burrowed beneath the defenses, emerging from the ground in a coordinated ambush. Screeches filled the air as the insectoids tore into the Alliance ranks, their scything limbs cutting through armor with horrifying ease. The neat formation shattered. The Telari, caught off guard, struggled to reform their mental link. The Olmari, built for ranged combat, faltered in close quarters. Even the massive Vraks found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer number of enemies pouring through the breach. And yet, amidst the chaos, the humans moved. Not with the precision of the Olmari or the seamless coordination of the Telari, but with raw, unfiltered instinct. They ducked, rolled, fired on the move, using every bit of cover, every unpredictable motion to their advantage. A Telari soldier, disoriented by the sudden attack, found himself cornered, until a human corporal tackled him out of the way, raising his rifle and firing 3 rounds into the Kryn's exposed thorax before helping the alien back to his feet. Cole didn't hesitate. He adjusted, switched targets, and pulled the trigger. The Kryn officer's head snapped back, ichor spraying from the precise hole through its cranium. The immediate effect was subtle. No single kill would stop a swarm, but the shift was undeniable. The Kryn around it hesitated, if only for a moment, and that was all the time the defenders needed. Vance, status? Cole muttered, cycling the bolt of his rifle. Bad, the sergeant replied, voice tight. But not lost. Below, the humans were regrouping faster than the others. They had no hive mind, no shared mental link, but they had something just as powerful. They had experience, they had instinct, and, most importantly, they had each other. Cole exhaled and took another shot. Another Kryn fell. He could feel the momentum shifting, but they weren't out of this yet. The real battle had only just begun. The first shots lit up the valley like falling stars. Blinding streaks of plasma carved through the dust-choked air, slamming into the advancing Kryn swarm. The Alliance defenses roared to life, unleashing a storm of firepower from their barricades. The Tellari's precision strikes burned through chitinous armor. Ulmari heavy gunners laid down relentless bursts of plasma, and the Vraks, towering over the fortifications, sent out shockwaves of destruction with each thunderous barrage. And yet, the Kryn did not slow. They surged forward in a black tide, their razor-sharp limbs tearing through the rocky ground as they advanced. Even as their front lines collapsed under the hail of gunfire, the rest adapted, shifting their formations, learning the patterns of the defenders' fire, minimizing their losses. Adrian Cole remained still, his rifle nestled against his shoulder, his scope scanning the chaos below. He wasn't looking at the mindless drones charging the barricades. He was looking for the minds that guided them. Vance, talk to me, he murmured. Flanking movement on the eastern ridge, Vance reported, his binoculars locked onto a splinter group of Kryn climbing the rocks. They're trying to hit the rear defenses. Cole adjusted his aim, tracking the lead climber. It moved differently than the rest, more calculated, its limbs gripping the rock face with careful precision. A commander. He exhaled, steadying his shot. The rifle cracked, the sound lost beneath the chaos of battle. A fraction of a second later, the Kryn officer's skull exploded in a mist of black ichor. The ones behind it hesitated. Another shot. Another kill. The hesitation turned into disorder. Without guidance, the flanking movement collapsed, the drones skittering back down the ridge, their attack abandoned. But the main assault hadn't stopped. Below, the Kryn reached the outer barricades, slamming into them with horrifying force. Screams rang out as the first defenders fell, their bodies torn apart by scything limbs. The Telari, despite their precision, couldn't fire fast enough. The Ulmari, engineered for range combat, struggled in the chaos of close quarters. Even the Vraks, with all their brute strength, found themselves overwhelmed. The battle was shifting. Cole forced himself to breathe, forced himself to focus. If the outer defenses fell, the outpost was lost. He found another target, another officer, directing the chaos from the center of the swarm. He fired. The Kryn leader fell, but this time there was no hesitation. They had learned. Another figure rose to take its place almost instantly, as if expecting the loss. The swarm didn't falter. It adapted. The Kryn weren't just mindless beasts. They were something far worse. They were evolving. Cole clenched his jaw. We need to end this. Now. Vance didn't argue. He just scanned the battlefield again, looking for an opening, looking for a weakness. Because if they didn't find one soon, there wouldn't be anything left to save. The world narrowed to a single point of focus. Adrian Cole lay as still as the stone beneath him, his cheek pressed against the rifle stock, his breath measured and slow. He felt the wind shift across the ridgeline, the faint pull of gravity tugging at the long barrel of his weapon. The battlefield below was a storm of chaos, gunfire, plasma bursts, the shriek of dying soldiers, both human and alien. But none of it mattered. Not yet. Through the scope, he saw the Kryn commander. It was taller than the others, its carapace a deep obsidian streaked with crimson markings that denoted rank. It moved differently too, more deliberate, less frenzied. While the other Kryn swarmed forward in waves, this one stood back, watching, calculating. Its multifaceted eyes gleamed with something dangerously close to intelligence. This was the mind guiding the onslaught, and it had to die. Cole shifted his grip, adjusting for the micro-movements in the alien's posture. His spotter, Elias Vance, lay beside him, barely breathing as he tracked the battlefield through his own optics. "Range?" Cole asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 2.1 clicks. Winds picking up about 3 meters per second westward. Cole made the adjustment in his head. No digital targeting, no neural link feeding him telemetry. Just years of experience, muscle memory, and an intimate understanding of how death traveled through the air. The Kryn commander turned its head slightly, its mandibles clicking. Something about the way it moved sent a chill through Cole's spine. It was watching. Not the battle, not the Alliance forces struggling to hold the line, but them, as if it knew. He didn't hesitate. The rifle bucked against his shoulder. The suppressed crack of the shot was barely audible over the chaos below. The Kryn commander jerked its head, snapping back. For a brief, impossible moment, it remained standing, as if its body refused to accept what had happened. Then, slowly, it crumpled, dark ichors spilling onto the cracked earth. And the battlefield changed. The Kryn assault faltered, not from confusion, but hesitation. The psychic connection linking them to their commander severed in an instant, disrupting the intricate web of coordination that made them so lethal. Some continued forward, driven by pure momentum, but others twitched, uncertain, waiting for orders that would never come. "Confirmed kill," Vance murmured, still watching through his binoculars. "That did something." "Not enough," Cole muttered, already cycling the bolt for another shot. Below, the Alliance forces seized their opportunity. Human soldiers, battered and bloodied, pushed forward, their movements less like a rehearsed advance and more like a pack of wolves descending upon weakened prey. A Telari squad, once on the verge of collapse, reformed and launched a precision strike against the scattered Kryn, their plasma bolts carving through confused ranks. Even the Vraks, hulking brutes that they were, seemed to fight harder, emboldened by the sudden shift in the enemy's confidence. But Cole knew the Kryn weren't beaten yet. His crosshairs swept across the battlefield, searching. The loss of a single commander wouldn't stop the entire swarm. Somewhere, another mind would be taking control, adapting, reasserting dominance. He just had to find it first. Then he saw it. Near the eastern ridge, just beyond the initial swarm, a new figure emerged, another Kryn, this one marked with violet streaks along its carapace. The second in command. Unlike its fallen predecessor, this one wasn't standing back. It was moving, weaving through the battlefield with terrifying speed, its limbs flickering in rapid, almost erratic motions. Cole's grip tightened. This one was different, smarter. It wasn't just leading, it was hunting. Before he could line up the shot, the Kryn officer vanished into the chaos, using the shifting battle as cover. "Shit," Cole breathed. "Vance, track that one." "It's not running, it's repositioning." Vance swept his binoculars across the field. "Got it." Moving toward the southern flank. "Looks like it's—" He stopped. Cole glanced at him. "What?" Vance's jaw clenched. "It's looking for you." The realization sent a cold shiver through Cole's spine. The Kryn had learned. His scope snapped back to the battlefield, scanning frantically. It was no longer just about taking another shot. The Kryn officer had disappeared for a reason. It knew what a sniper could do, and it was coming for him. The game had changed. The first warning was the dust. A faint, unnatural disturbance in the wind, just enough to set Cole's instincts on edge. He didn't move. Not yet, but he shifted his focus away from the battlefield, letting his peripheral vision scan the rocky ridge behind them. The Kryn officer was close. Too close. Vance had already caught on. He slid his hand toward his sidearm, slow and steady, keeping his movements small. "It's flanking," he murmured. "Probably circling around the ridge." Cole exhaled through his nose. Then we don't have much time. Below, the battle raged on. The Alliance forces were holding, but just barely. The initial shock of the Kryn commander's death had given them an edge, but the swarm was regaining cohesion. If Cole didn't get another shot off soon, they would be back at full strength, and the outpost would be lost. But he couldn't afford to line up another shot. Not with the predator stalking him. Another shift in the dust. A shadow flickered against the rock outcroppings, gone in an instant. The Kryn officer was moving low, fast, using the uneven terrain to its advantage. It was hunting the way Cole would hunt, calculating, patient, waiting for the perfect angle. They had underestimated these things. Not anymore. Cole's mind worked fast, running through options. If they repositioned, they'd expose themselves. If they stayed put, they'd be sitting ducks. And then he saw it. Just beyond the ridge, a natural choke point where the rocks jutted up in sharp, uneven spires. A kill zone. He glanced at Vance. "We move on my mark. Make noise, draw it in." Vance nodded once. Cole inhaled slowly, centered himself, then rolled away from his sniper's nest, kicking up a deliberate spray of loose gravel. The response was immediate. A chittering screech cut through the air as the Kryn officer lunged, its elongated limbs striking the ground where Cole had been just moments before. It was faster than the others, more fluid, its body coiling and uncoiling like a serpent as it corrected its course midair. Cole hit the ground in a crouch, swinging his rifle up, but the Kryn was already moving, zigzagging toward him with terrifying speed. Its mandibles flared wide, its razor-sharp forelimbs gleaming in the sunlight. Vance opened fire. The first shot grazed the Kryn's side, sending a splatter of dark ichor against the rock face. The second missed. The third caught it in the leg, slowing it for a fraction of a second, just enough. Cole didn't hesitate. He pivoted, letting the rifle drop, and drew his sidearm in one smooth motion. 2 shots. Center mass. The Kryn shrieked and stumbled, its movements jerky, erratic. Not dead yet, but wounded. "Move!" Cole barked, already sprinting toward the choke point. Vance was right behind him. The Kryn, despite its injuries, recovered with terrifying speed, scrambling after them with murderous intent. They hit the narrow pass just in time. Cole spun, bracing against the rock wall, his pistol already aimed. The Kryn leapt. He fired. The bullet punched through its skull, just beneath the gleaming crest of its exoskeleton. The Kryn collapsed midair, its momentum carrying it forward in a lifeless sprawl. It hit the ground hard, skidding to a stop in a twitching heap. Cole exhaled, lowering his weapon. Vance nudged the body with his boot, making sure it wasn't getting back up. "Well," he said, voice still tight from adrenaline. "That was fun." Cole didn't answer. He was already moving back to the ridge, grabbing his rifle and dropping into position. The battle wasn't over. Through his scope, he saw the Kryn beginning to reorganize, another officer stepping up to take command. They had bought time, but not enough. He chambered another round and took the shot. Silence settled over the battlefield, thick and unnatural. Where once there had been the shrieks of Kryn warriors and the deafening roar of gunfire, now there was only the crackling of burning debris and the labored breaths of the surviving defenders. The ground was littered with the bodies of the fallen, both Kryn and Alliance soldiers, bathed in the eerie glow of the setting suns. Cole remained motionless, his rifle still trained on the valley below, waiting. Experience had taught him that battles didn't always end with the last gunshot. The Kryn were hive-minded, relentless. If there were even a single leader left among them, they might regroup, might launch one final suicidal push. But they didn't. The swarm had broken. The few surviving Kryn scattered, their insectoid limbs carrying them away from the outpost, vanishing into the distant mountains. Without coordination, without their leaders, they had reverted to something primal. They weren't warriors anymore, just frightened creatures fleeing death. Vance let out a long breath beside him. "I think that's it," he muttered. Cole scanned the retreating stragglers through his scope, tracking their movements, ensuring there was no deception. But there was nothing. The Kryn had never retreated before, not in all recorded history. But today, they had learned fear. He lowered his rifle. From the outpost below, the battered Alliance forces slowly emerged from cover, moving among the wreckage to check for survivors. Some stood in stunned disbelief. Others clapped each other on the back, sharing weary, exhausted laughter. The Telari linked hands, their bioluminescent skin pulsing in unison. Some ritual of remembrance, perhaps. The Elmari gathered their wounded with mechanical precision, scanning each body for signs of life. Even the towering Vraks, their massive forms dented and scorched from battle, bowed their heads in solemn acknowledgement of the lives lost. And then, slowly, they all turned their eyes to the ridge, to the human sniper who had turned the tide. Cole felt the weight of their gazes, but said nothing. He wasn't one for speeches. He simply slung his rifle over his shoulder and made his way down the slope, his boots crunching over shattered stone and spent shell casings. When he reached the barricades, a Telari officer stepped forward, her iridescent eyes studying him with a new intensity. She had been skeptical of him before, back when the council had dismissed humanity as clumsy, primitive, unfocused. Now, she inclined her head in a slow, deliberate gesture of respect. "You're kind," she said, her voice tinged with something almost like awe. "Are not what we believed you to be." Cole met her gaze, expression unreadable. "No," he said simply. "We never were." Behind him, the twin suns dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the battlefield. And in the silence that followed, the galaxy's perception of humanity changed forever.